A dying dog hugs a paralyzed girl before being put down. And then, this happened. Everyone thought it was just a heartbreaking goodbye between a sick old dog and the girl who'd lost everything. But when the dog suddenly lunges away from the needle and pulls her from danger, something impossible happens. Her leg moves for the first time since the crash that ruined her life. What starts as a moment of hope spirals into a chilling mystery. Because the more she looks back at that accident, the less it looks like an accident at all. As the clock ticks on the dog's final days, secrets begin to surface. Secrets powerful enough to destroy lives. Why did the dog react that way? What really happened the night she lost her legs? And when the truth finally claws its way to the surface, will it set her free or cost her everything she has left? Drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. The bell above the veterinary clinic door chimed softly as Sheena Whitcomb pushed her daughter's wheelchair through the entrance. Lark sat stiffly, her auburn hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, her hands gripping Huck's worn leather leash so tightly her knuckles had turned white. The old rescue dog padded slowly beside her, his graying muzzle low to the ground and his cloudy eyes reflecting years of loyal service. Dr. Rhea Calder looked up from her desk, pushing her sliding glasses back up her nose. The sight before her made her heart sink. She knew exactly why they were here. She'd seen that look of quiet devastation on too many pet owners' faces before. "Mrs. Whitcomb," Rhea said softly, standing to greet them. "Lark, please, come into the exam room." The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as they made their way down the narrow hallway. Sheena's shoulders were hunched with invisible weight, and Lark hadn't looked up once since entering the clinic. Only Huck maintained his dignity, limping but steady beside his young owner's wheelchair. "The bone cancer has spread," Sheena explained, her voice cracking slightly. "We can't afford the treatments anymore, and seeing him in pain—" She trailed off, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue from her purse. Rhea nodded sympathetically as she helped them get situated in the exam room. "I understand. You're making a loving choice, even though it's the hardest one." She knelt down to examine Huck, running her hands gently over his swollen joints. Despite his obvious discomfort, the old dog gave her hand a friendly lick. "He saved so many people," Lark suddenly spoke up, her voice barely above a whisper. "Back when he worked with the mountain rescue team. It's not fair that we can't save him now." Rhea's heart clenched at the raw pain in the girl's voice. She'd heard about Lark's accident months ago. The whole town had. Such a vibrant, athletic teenager, now confined to a wheelchair. And Huck had been by, her side through all of it. "I'll get everything ready," Rhea said gently, turning to prepare the injection. The familiar motions felt heavier today as she drew up the proper dose of medication. Behind her, she could hear Lark's quiet sniffles and Sheena's murmured words of comfort. Just as Rhea turned back toward them, syringe in hand, Huck's head suddenly shot up. His nostrils flared and a low growl rumbled in his chest, a sound that seemed to transform him from an elderly, ailing pet back into the alert rescue dog he'd once been. "Huck?" Lark's voice held confusion and concern. Before anyone could react, Huck lunged forward with surprising strength. His shoulder knocked against Rhea's hand, sending the syringe clattering to the floor. The old dog's hackles were raised, his cloudy eyes fixed on something none of them could see. "What in the world?" Sheena started to say, but her words were cut short by a sharp crackling sound from the wall behind them. Blue sparks suddenly shot from an electrical outlet, accompanied by the acrid smell of burning plastic. Smoke began to curl from the outlet as the crackling grew louder. Ria's training kicked in immediately. "We need to evacuate," she said firmly, already moving toward Lark's wheelchair. But Huck was faster. With surprising agility, he positioned himself between Lark and the smoking wall, his body pressed protectively against her legs. His stance was unmistakable. This was a rescue dog doing what he'd been trained to do. And then it happened. Lark gasped, her eyes going wide. "My foot!" she exclaimed, her voice trembling with disbelief. "I felt my foot twitch." Sheena grabbed her daughter's hand. "What?" "I felt something. Just for a second, but—" Lark's voice broke as tears spilled down her cheeks. "I felt my right foot move." The smoke was getting thicker now, and Ria could hear the fire alarm beginning to sound from the front of the clinic. "We'll figure this out later," she said decisively. "Right now, we need to get out of here." She and Sheena quickly wheeled Lark toward the exit, Huck limping but determined at their side. As they emerged into the fresh air outside, Ria could hear fire truck sirens in the distance. But her mind was racing with what she'd just witnessed. Not just Huck's strange reaction to danger before any of them had noticed it, but the implications of Lark's reported sensation. They watched from the parking lot as firefighters quickly contained the small electrical fire. Lark hadn't let go of Huck's fur, and the old dog hadn't moved from his protective position. His eyes, though clouded with age, seemed sharper somehow, more alert than they'd been in months. "I think," Ria said slowly, looking at the devoted dog and his young owner, "that we might want to hold off on any decisions about Huck today." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Sometimes, when we think we're at the end of one path, life shows us the beginning of another." Lark nodded, tears still streaming down her face as she buried her fingers in Huck's fur. The old dog turned his head to gently lick her hand, his tail wagging slowly but steadily. Whatever had just happened in that exam room, Huck's warning, the fire, the unexplained movement in Lark's paralyzed limb, it felt like more than mere coincidence. Sheena stood behind her daughter's wheelchair, one hand on Lark's shoulder, the other pressed against her mouth as she tried to process everything that had just occurred. The fear and resignation that had marked her face when they'd entered the clinic had been replaced by something else. A glimmer of hope she seemed almost afraid to acknowledge. "Take him home," Ria advised, watching as Huck maintained his vigilant position beside Lark's wheelchair. "We can discuss pain management options for him tomorrow, but right now I think—" She adjusted her glasses, studying the pair thoughtfully. "I think there might be more to this story than any of us realized." As the fire truck's sirens grew louder, Ria helped guide everyone to a safe distance from the clinic. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the parking lot while they waited, Huck maintaining his protective stance beside Lark's wheelchair. The old dog's eyes remained alert, scanning their surroundings with an intensity that belied his illness. The first fire truck rounded the corner with lights flashing, followed by two more emergency vehicles. Sheena's shoulders tensed as a tall, muscular man in firefighting gear jumped down from the lead truck. Troy Gantry strode toward them, his face tight with concern that seemed more performed than genuine. "Everyone okay here?" Troy called out, his boots crunching on the gravel. He placed a possessive hand on Sheena's shoulder while barely glancing at Lark. "We're fine," Ria answered professionally. "It appears to be an electrical fire. Thankfully, Huck actually warned us before—" "That old mutt?" Troy cut her off with a dismissive wave. "Probably just got spooked by the smoke. You know how animals get." He turned to the other firefighters. "Johnson, Martinez, check the west entrance. I'll take point on this." Lark leaned forward in her wheelchair, her voice stronger than usual. "No, Mom. Tell him. Huck knew something was wrong before there was any smoke. And then I felt my foot move." Troy's expression hardened for just a moment before he forced a sympathetic smile. Now, honey, you know that's not possible. The doctors were very clear about your condition. You're probably just getting worked up from all the excitement. But I did feel something, Lark insisted, her hands gripping her wheelchair's armrests. Dr. Calder was there. She saw how Huck reacted. Rhea stepped forward, her professional demeanor masking her growing unease with Troy's attitude. It's true that Huck displayed some unusual behavior just before the electrical malfunction became apparent. Given his background in rescue work. Look, Troy interrupted again, his tone growing stern. I appreciate everyone trying to be supportive, but we can't encourage false hope. That dog is old and sick, and Lark needs to accept reality. He turned to Sheena, his voice softening manipulatively. You know I'm right, babe. We talked about this. Sheena wavered, looking between her daughter's determined face and Troy's authoritative stance. Maybe we should all just go home and calm down, she suggested weakly. It's been a long day. The drive home was tense and quiet. Huck lay in the back of the car beside Lark's wheelchair, his head resting on her lap. Every few minutes, his ears would twitch at some distant sound, remaining eerily vigilant. Lark kept one hand buried in his fur, as if afraid someone might snatch him away. At home, Troy insisted on helping Sheena get Lark settled, though his assistance seemed more about maintaining control than offering genuine help. As they maneuvered the wheelchair through the front door, he launched into his argument. That dog's already suffering, he declared, pacing the living room. After today's episode, he's clearly becoming unstable. What if he has another outburst? He could hurt someone. He wasn't having an outburst, Lark protested, her voice tight with frustration. He was trying to warn us, and something happened when he pressed against my legs. I know what I felt. Troy's face darkened. Enough. This kind of hysteria isn't helping anyone. He turned to Sheena, who stood uncertainly by the kitchen door. Tell her, Sheena. Tell her we're taking that dog back to Dr. Calder first thing tomorrow morning. Lark wheeled herself between her mother and Troy. Mom, please! You can't let this happen. Huck saved us today. He might be trying to tell us something important. Sheena twisted her dish towel in her hands, looking everywhere but at her daughter's pleading face. Maybe Troy's right, honey. We can't afford to keep treating Huck's cancer, and if he's starting to act unpredictably... He's not unpredictable, Lark's voice cracked. He's the same loyal, protective dog he's always been. Why won't anyone listen to me? Because we're the adults here, Troy snapped, his patience visibly wearing thin. And we're trying to do what's best for everyone. He stepped closer to Lark's wheelchair, looming over her. That dog is being put down tomorrow, and that's final. Huck growled low in his throat, positioning himself between Troy and Lark. For a moment, something like fear flickered across Troy's face before he masked it with anger. See, he's already showing aggression. Sheena, get him in the garage for tonight. I don't want him in the house. That night, Lark lay in bed, unable to sleep. She could hear Huck's occasional whimper from the garage, each sound twisting her heart. The memory of that subtle movement in her foot kept playing through her mind, along with the absolute certainty that it hadn't been her imagination. When sleep finally came, it brought with it the dream she'd been avoiding for months. She was back in her car on that rain-slicked bridge, windshield wipers fighting against the downpour. But this time, the dream was different. Instead of the usual blur of motion and impact, she caught glimpses of another vehicle, a dark truck moving erratically. The sound of metal crushing metal seemed to echo forever. Lark jerked awake, her heart pounding. The digital clock on her nightstand showed 3:15 in the morning. Through her open window came the sound of frantic scratching from the garage door, followed by Huck's urgent whine. Something about that sound resonated with the lingering fragments of her dream. Huck wasn't just making noise. He was trying to tell her something, just as he'd tried to tell them about the fire. Lark pushed herself up on her elbows, staring into the darkness. The doctors had said her paralysis was permanent. Troy insisted Huck was dangerous and dying. But for the first time since the accident, she felt something stirring inside her besides grief and resignation. Determination. The scratching continued, more insistent now. Huck's whines took on an almost speaking quality, as if he were begging her to understand something vital. Lark looked toward her wheelchair, then back at the window where moonlight spilled across her floor. She might be paralyzed, and Huck might be sick, but they weren't finished yet, not by a long shot. Something was happening, something important, and Lark refused to let anyone dismiss it anymore. Lark's heart pounded as she stared at her wheelchair in the darkness. Huck's urgent scratching from the garage hadn't stopped. If anything, it grew more insistent with each passing minute. She knew getting outside wouldn't be easy, but something deep inside told her she had to try. With practiced movements, she pulled herself into the wheelchair. Her legs hung uselessly, but her arms were strong from months of adapting to her new reality. She grabbed the light jacket draped over her bedpost and carefully wheeled to her bedroom door. The house creaked quietly in the night. Down the hall she could hear her mother's soft snoring. Lark held her breath as she eased past, grateful that the hardwood floors were smooth enough to move silently. When she reached the kitchen door that led to the garage, she paused, listening intently for any sign that someone might have heard her. Silence. Her fingers trembled slightly as she turned the doorknob. The garage door wasn't locked. Why would it be? No one expected a paralyzed girl to go wandering in the middle of the night. The moment she opened the door, Huck was there, his tail wagging with desperate energy. Despite his illness, his eyes were bright and focused. "Okay, boy," she whispered, reaching down to scratch behind his ears. "Show me what's so important." Huck led her to the garage's side door. It took some maneuvering to get it open without making noise, but soon they were outside in the cool night air. The moon hung full and bright overhead, casting everything in silvery light. Their small town was quiet at this hour, with only the occasional distant bark of a dog or hoot of an owl breaking the silence. Huck moved with purpose, staying close to Lark's wheelchair as they made their way down the sidewalk. Despite his cancer, he seemed energized, as if drawing strength from some hidden reserve. Every few yards he would look back at her, making sure she was following. "Where are we going?" Lark murmured, though she was beginning to recognize the route. Her arms worked steadily, pushing the wheels forward. The night air felt fresh against her face, carrying the scent of late summer flowers and cut grass. It was the first time she'd been out alone since the accident, and despite her nervousness, there was something freeing about it. They turned onto River Road, and Lark's throat tightened. Ahead loomed the old bridge where her life had changed forever. Moonlight glinted off the steel guardrails that had been repaired after her crash. Her hands faltered on her wheels. Huck whined softly, nudging her arm with his nose. His eyes seemed to say, "Trust me." Taking a deep breath, Lark continued forward. As they approached the bridge, Huck veered off toward the grassy embankment that sloped down to the riverbank. The wheelchair couldn't follow him there, but Lark could see him clearly in the moonlight as he began pawing urgently at something in the tall weeds. "What is it, boy?" Huck returned to her, something dangling from his mouth. When he dropped it in her lap, Lark's breath caught in her throat. It was her silver locket, the one she'd been wearing the night of the crash, the one they'd never found afterward. Her hands shook as she picked it up. The moonlight was bright enough to see the damage. The once smooth surface was deeply dented, and as she turned it over, something caught her eye. There, embedded in one of the deeper scratches, was a fleck of paint. Not just any paint. Glossy red paint that she would recognize anywhere. The same red as Troy's restored 1978 pickup truck. The world seemed to tilt sideways as memories crashed over her. The rainy night. Headlights in her rearview mirror. A flash of red. The sound of impact. She'd always assumed she'd lost control on the wet road. But now... "Oh my God," she whispered, her fingers clutching the locket so tightly the edges bit into her palm. Huck pressed against her leg, offering silent support as the truth sank in. Troy had been behind her that night. Troy, who always seemed to get angry when she challenged him. Troy, who had been drinking at the bar before the crash. She remembered her mother mentioning it later. Troy, who had been first on the scene to help her. It hadn't been an accident at all. The realization hit her like a physical blow. Her hands began to shake so badly she almost dropped the locket. Huck whined softly, placing his head in her lap. The weight of his presence helped anchor her as her mind raced through the implications. Troy's insistence on putting Huck down made horrible sense now. The old rescue dog's protective instincts had never wavered. He'd always seemed uneasy around Troy, and today at the vet's office, he'd reacted the moment Troy arrived. Huck had known all along. Lark looked down at her faithful companion, seeing him with new eyes. "You've been trying to tell us, haven't you? All this time." Huck's tail thumped once against the ground, his wise eyes never leaving her face. Despite his illness, he'd led her here tonight, determined to show her the truth. The truth that could destroy her mother's relationship with Troy. The truth that could change everything. The locket felt impossibly heavy in her hand. Its dented surface held proof of what Troy had done. But would anyone believe her? Would her mother believe her? The thought of Troy sitting at their dinner table, playing the concerned boyfriend while knowing what he'd done, made her stomach turn. A car's distant engine broke through her thoughts. Huck's ears perked up, and Lark realized how vulnerable they were out here in the open. If someone, especially Troy, discovered them now. "We need to go home," she whispered, tucking the locket securely in her jacket pocket. "Come on, boy." The journey back seemed to take both forever and no time at all. Every shadow made her heart jump, expecting Troy's truck to appear at any moment. But they made it home safely, slipping back inside as quietly as they'd left. Only when she was back in her room, with Huck safely returned to the garage, did Lark allow herself to really breathe. She held the locket up one more time in the dim light from her window. The red paint gleamed accusingly. The weight of this discovery pressed down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. Her world, already transformed by the accident, had shifted again. But this time, instead of feeling helpless, she felt something else growing inside her. Anger, yes, but also determination. Troy had tried to silence her once. Now he wanted to silence Huck. But he hadn't counted on either of them being so stubborn, so unwilling to give up. Lark clutched the locket tightly, her mind already working on what to do next. She wasn't helpless anymore. She had proof now, and more importantly, she had Huck. The truth was finally coming to light, one moonlit revelation at a time. Dr. Rhea Calder couldn't sleep. The events at the clinic kept replaying in her mind. The fire, Huck's reaction, and most importantly, Lark's claim about feeling movement in her foot. Something about it all nagged at her. She got up from her desk where she'd been attempting paperwork and walked to the cabinet where they kept old patient records. Huck's file was thin, containing only basic information from when the Whitcombs had adopted him. As she flipped through it, something caught her eye. A note about an old collar that had been replaced during his first visit. Acting on instinct, she went to the storage closet and dug through a box of unclaimed items. There, at the bottom, was a weathered leather collar. Her fingers traced the metal tag, brushing away dust to reveal worn lettering. Rescue K9, Huck. Ria's breath caught. She knew exactly what this meant, and who she needed to call. Her hand trembled slightly as she reached for her phone. It had been 3 years since she'd spoken to her brother. Charles picked up on the 4th ring. Hello. Charles? It's Ria. She paused, throat tight. I need your expertise on something. There was a long silence before he responded, his voice carefully neutral. What kind of expertise? Do you remember training a rescue dog named Huck? Gray and brown, about 70 pounds? Huck? The surprise in Charles's voice was evident. Of course I remember him. One of my best. Had to retire him after he injured his hip on a rescue. Why? Ria explained everything. The Whitcombs, the accident, the recent events at the clinic. As she spoke, she could hear her brother's breathing change, becoming more focused. I'll be there in 30 minutes, he said. True to his word, Charles's truck pulled up outside the clinic exactly 30 minutes later. Ria watched through the window as he stepped out, tall and broad-shouldered, looking exactly as she remembered him. The familiar ache of their estrangement squeezed her heart. She'd already called Lark, who arrived with Huck just as Charles was walking up the clinic steps. The old dog's reaction was immediate. His tail began wagging furiously, and he pulled forward on his leash, whining with recognition. Charles knelt down, his weathered face softening. Hey, old friend, he said softly, letting Huck sniff his hands before scratching behind his ears. You haven't changed a bit. Lark watched this reunion with wide eyes. You trained Huck? For 5 years. Charles stood, offering Lark a gentle smile. He was one of our best search and rescue dogs, saved more than a dozen lives before his injury. Inside the clinic, Ria watched as her brother examined Huck thoroughly, his hands moving with practiced expertise. His hip's worse, he noted, but his nose is still sharp. You said he reacted to something at the crash site? Lark pulled out the locket, explaining how Huck had led her to it. As soon as she opened her palm, Huck's demeanor changed. He grew alert, nose twitching, and gave a low whine. Charles's gray eyes narrowed. That's his alert signal. He's picking up something specific from that locket. He looked at Lark intently. Would you be willing to let us try something? If Huck's still got his training, he might be able to track where that scent leads. Lark's hands tightened on her wheelchair's arms. When? Dawn would be best. Less contamination from traffic and daily activity. Ria stepped forward. I'll drive. Charles glanced at his sister, surprise and something like gratitude flickering across his face. Thank you. The next few hours passed in tense anticipation. As the sky began to lighten, they gathered at the bridge. The morning air was crisp and clean, dew sparkling on the grass. Charles helped Lark from the car into her wheelchair while Ria got Huck ready. Now, Charles explained, kneeling beside Lark's wheelchair. Huck was trained for both rescue and evidence searches. If there's anything connected to what happened that night, he might be able to find it. He looked at the old dog with pride. Even retired, these skills don't fade. Lark held out the locket, letting Huck sniff it thoroughly. Charles watched the dog's body language carefully, noting how his posture changed, alert and focused, just like in his working days. Good boy, Charles murmured. Show us what you've got. Huck lifted his nose to the air, testing the wind. Then he began to move, pulling gently but purposefully on his leash. Charles followed, matching the dog's pace while keeping one hand on Lark's wheelchair to help guide it over the uneven ground. Rhea brought up the rear, watching her brother work. It was like stepping back in time, seeing him in his element again. The confident set of his shoulders, the quiet way he communicated with both dog and handler. This was the Charles she remembered, before the accident that had driven them apart. The morning sun was just cresting the trees as they followed Huck along the bridge's shoulder. The old dog moved with renewed energy, his nose working the ground methodically. Every few steps he would pause, verify his direction, then continue with certainty. "He's following something specific," Charles explained quietly to Lark. "See how he keeps checking? He's making sure he stays on the right track." Lark watched with growing hope and nervousness. "How far will he go?" "As far as the scent takes him," Charles answered, "and knowing Huck, he won't give up until he finds what he's looking for." They continued on, the only sounds being the crunch of wheels on gravel and Huck's steady breathing. The old dog was moving with a purpose now, leading them toward whatever secrets still remained from that fateful night. Dawn had fully broken over the hills, casting long shadows across their path as they followed Huck's determined lead. Whatever they might find, one thing was certain. With Charles's arrival, the search for truth had gained not just an expert guide, but also a steadfast ally who understood both the capabilities of a remarkable dog and the courage of a young woman refusing to give up. The morning light caught the determination in Lark's eyes as she watched Huck work, her hand still clutching the locket that had started it all. Charles walked beside her, steady and sure, while Rhea followed, the siblings united in purpose for the first time in years. Together they moved forward, ready to uncover whatever trail Huck might find. Huck's nose led them away from the bridge, his pace steady despite his aging joints. The morning dew dampened his paws as he tracked an invisible trail that only he could detect. Charles kept one hand on Lark's wheelchair, carefully guiding it over the uneven ground while holding Huck's leash with his other hand. "He's got something strong," Charles said quietly, watching Huck's focused movements. "See how his tail is held straight? That's his working position." They followed the old dog across a dry wash where Charles and Rhea had to carefully maneuver Lark's wheelchair through the sandy bottom. Loose pebbles crunched under the wheels as they made their way up the other side. Lark's heart began to beat faster as she recognized their direction. "We're heading toward home," she said, her voice tight with tension. Sure enough, Huck led them straight to the weathered barn that stood behind their rental house. The structure was old but solid, its faded red paint peeling in the morning sun. Huck went straight to the padlocked doors, scratching at them and giving a low whine. "What's he found?" Rhea asked, coming up beside them. Before anyone could answer, a truck door slammed nearby. Troy emerged from behind the house, his face darkening as he spotted them. He strode over, boots kicking up dust. "What's going on here?" His voice was sharp, eyes fixed on Charles. "Who are you?" "Charles Calder," he answered calmly. "I'm helping with Huck's assessment." Troy's gaze shifted to the barn doors where Huck continued to scratch and whine. "Get that dog away from there. That's private property." "The property's rented to my mom," Lark pointed out, her fingers twisting in her lap. "We've never been told we couldn't go in." "Well, I'm telling you now." Troy moved between them and the barn. "I store work equipment in there. Valuable stuff. Can't risk anything getting damaged." Charles kept his voice neutral. "Seems like Huck's pretty interested in what's inside." "Yeah, well, there's an old truck in there I've been meaning to take care of." Troy's hand rested possessively on the padlock. "Been taking up space too long? Think I'll haul it out this weekend, get it to the scrapyard." Lark felt her blood run cold. The truck, the red paint on her locket. She exchanged a look with Charles, who gave an almost imperceptible nod. "Come on, Huck," Charles called, gently pulling the dog back. "Let's work on something else." They retreated to the front yard, where Charles took out the locket again. "We'll do some refinement exercises," he explained, letting Troy see they were moving away from the barn. "Help Huck focus his tracking skills." They waited until Troy got in his truck and drove off to his work site. As soon as he was gone, Charles turned to Lark. "Your dog's not wrong. There's something in that barn he wants us to find." "The truck," Lark whispered. "Troy's never let anyone near it. Says it's an old project he's restoring." Charles nodded, thoughtfully. "Let's give Huck some practice runs. Make it look legitimate in case anyone's watching." For the next hour, they worked with Huck in the yard. Charles would hide the locket in different spots, letting the dog search for it. Each time, Huck performed perfectly, demonstrating his training hadn't faded with age. But whenever they gave him a free command, he inevitably returned to the barn doors, scratching and whining with increasing urgency. "Classic indication behavior," Charles explained quietly to Lark. "He's telling us that's where the strongest connection to your locket is." Rhea watched the barn with worried eyes. Troy seemed pretty adamant about keeping everyone out. "Too adamant," Charles agreed. "And suddenly wanting to get rid of that truck?" He shook his head. "Timing suspicious." Lark stared at the barn, her hand clutching the locket. Every scratch of Huck's paws against those doors seemed to echo the pounding of her heart. The dog's persistence confirmed what she'd begun to suspect. Behind those locked doors lay the truth about her accident. "We need to get in there," she said firmly, "before Troy moves that truck." Charles knelt beside her wheelchair, his gray eyes serious. "We'll find a way, but we have to be smart about it. Troy's watching now, and he's going to be extra careful." They worked with Huck for a while longer, practicing tracking patterns that looked innocent but kept bringing them within view of the barn. Each time, Huck's reaction was the same, making a straight line for those doors, his entire body signaling that he'd found what they were looking for. The morning wore on, and the sun climbed higher in the sky. They had to call it quits before the heat became too much for Huck, but the message was clear. Whatever evidence linked Troy to Lark's accident, it was locked away in that barn. The old rescue dog had done his job, pointing them toward the truth with unwavering certainty. As they helped Lark back into the house, Charles gave Huck a gentle pat. "Good boy," he murmured. "You haven't lost your touch at all." The old dog leaned against his former handler's leg, his cloudy eyes fixed on the barn. His whole demeanor seemed to say that his work wasn't finished, not until whatever lay behind those doors was brought into the light. The moon cast long shadows across the farmyard as Charles's truck rolled silently up the dirt driveway, lights off. It was nearly midnight. Lark sat waiting in her wheelchair on the back porch, her heart hammering against her ribs. Huck lay beside her, alert and watchful. "Ready?" Charles whispered as he approached. Rhea followed close behind, carrying a heavy toolbox. Lark nodded, gripping her wheelchair's arms. "Mom's working the late shift. We've got 3 hours." They moved like shadows across the yard. The barn loomed ahead, its weathered walls silver in the moonlight. Charles worked quickly at the padlock with a set of thin tools, while Rhea kept watch. Within minutes, the lock clicked open. The barn door creaked as they eased it open. Huck slipped inside first, nose to the ground. Charles switched on a flashlight, sweeping its beam across the dusty interior. Old farm equipment cast twisted shadows on the walls. In the center of the barn sat a large shape beneath a gray tarp. "There," Lark whispered, pointing. "That's where Troy keeps the truck he won't let anyone see." Charles circled the covered vehicle slowly, studying the ground. "These boards look newer than the rest," he said, crouching to examine the floorboards near the truck's rear. "Recently replaced." He pried up one board with a crowbar, then another. The wood came away easily, revealing freshly turned earth beneath. Huck began digging immediately, throwing dirt with his paws. "Easy, boy," Charles murmured, holding up his flashlight. Something glinted in the disturbed soil. Reaching down, he pulled out a handful of broken red glass. Lark's hands shook as she held up her locket, comparing the paint fleck to the glass fragments. "It matches perfectly." "Taillight pieces," Charles confirmed grimly. He buried the evidence. Rhea helped Charles pull back the tarp, revealing Troy's prized pickup truck. The vehicle gleamed with fresh paint, but not red. It had been repainted a deep forest green. "Look here," Charles said, directing his light to the rear corner. "New taillight assembly on the passenger side. But see how the paint's slightly different around it? This whole section's been repaired and repainted." Lark felt sick to her stomach as the pieces fell into place. The night of her accident came back in flashes. Headlights in her rearview mirror, a red pickup riding her bumper, the sudden impact that sent her car through the bridge railing. Huck kept digging, unearthing more fragments of red glass and twisted metal. Each piece was another confirmation of Troy's guilt. He hadn't just been there the night of her accident. He'd caused it. "Why?" Lark's voice cracked. "Why would he do this to me?" "I think I might know," Rhea said quietly. She pulled out her phone, showing them photos she'd taken at the clinic after the fire. "Look at the breaker box. See how the wires were crossed? That wasn't an accident or old wiring. Someone deliberately tampered with it." "The fire was meant to destroy evidence," Charles realized. "What did you find, Rhea?" "Medical records. The night of Lark's accident, Troy came to the clinic. He was drunk, aggressive. I had to threaten to call the police to get him to leave." Rhea's hands clenched. "I filed a report about his behavior. It would have shown he was out driving that night, intoxicated. And when Huck started acting strange at the clinic," Lark trailed off. "He recognized Troy's scent from the breaker box," Charles finished. "That's what set him off. Even sick, his training kicked in. He knew something was wrong." They worked quickly to document everything, taking photos and collecting the glass fragments as evidence. Charles carefully replaced the floorboards while Rhea gathered the broken taillight pieces into an evidence bag. "We need to get this to the police," Rhea said. "All of it. The locket, the glass, photos of the truck." "Not yet," Charles cautioned. "Troy has friends on the force. We need to be smart about this." He turned to Lark. "Are you ready for what comes next? Once we move on this, there's no going back." Lark stared at the truck that had taken away her ability to walk, that had changed her life forever. She thought of Troy's smug face every time he ordered her around, how he'd tried to force them to put Huck down, her jaw set with determination. "I'm ready," she said firmly. "He doesn't get to hurt anyone else." They carefully restored the barn to its original state, making sure everything looked untouched. As they locked up, Huck stood watching the truck one last time, a low growl rumbling in his chest. Back at the house, they gathered in the kitchen, speaking in hushed voices while plotting their next move. The evidence bags sat on the table between them, physical proof of Troy's crimes and desperate cover-up attempts. "Tomorrow," Charles said, "we start building the case. But tonight, you both need to act completely normal. Troy can't suspect we know anything." Lark reached down to scratch behind Huck's ears, feeling the old dog lean against her wheelchair. He'd led them to the truth, just as he'd been trained to do. Despite his illness, despite everything, he'd never stopped trying to protect her. "Good boy," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. You did it, Huck. You really did it. The old rescue dog's tail thumped against the floor, his cloudy eyes fixed on her with unwavering loyalty. Thanks to him, the truth was finally coming to light. Troy's carefully constructed lies were about to crumble, and justice, too long delayed, was finally within reach. Charles methodically photographed every angle of the truck's repainted surface, paying special attention to the replaced taillight assembly. His steady hands captured close-ups of the paint variations, the new parts, and the disturbed area where they'd found the buried evidence. "We need clear documentation of everything," he explained, adjusting his camera's settings. "The paint transition here, the repair work, it all tells a story. Details matter in cases like this." Lark watched from her wheelchair, her hands twisting in her lap. Each flash of the camera illuminated another piece of the puzzle, another confirmation of Troy's betrayal. Huck sat alert beside her, his presence a steady comfort in the dim barn. "Don't forget the floor," she reminded Charles, "where Huck found the pieces." Charles nodded, photographing the loose floorboards and the cavity beneath. "Good thinking, Lark. We need to show exactly where the evidence was concealed." Back at the house, Sheena paced the kitchen, her face drawn with worry. When Troy's truck pulled into the driveway, she squared her shoulders and went to meet him on the porch. Lark watched through the window, her heart pounding as her mother confronted the man who had caused so much pain. "Troy, we need to talk," Sheena said, her voice carrying through the screen door. "About the accident, about Lark." Troy's face hardened. "What about it? That was months ago." "I know what really happened that night." Sheena's voice quavered but held firm. "The red paint on the locket, the repairs to your truck. How could you do this to my daughter?" "You're being ridiculous," Troy scoffed, but his eyes had gone cold. "That girl's got you believing her crazy stories now? She's been unstable since the accident, making up wild tales." "She's not crazy!" Sheena's voice rose. "The evidence—" "Evidence?" Troy stepped closer, towering over her. "Listen carefully, Sheena. Your daughter's disturbed. She needs help, not encouragement. And you?" His voice dropped to a menacing whisper. "You need to remember whose house you're living in." Lark felt sick watching Troy's intimidation tactics work on her mother. Sheena seemed to shrink before him, her momentary courage faltering. "This is our home," Sheena protested weakly. "Is it?" Troy's laugh was ugly. "Last I checked, I own this property. One word from me, and you're both out on the street. Is that what you want?" From inside, Rhea touched Lark's shoulder. "We can't wait any longer," she whispered urgently. "He's already threatening to use his power over you. The next step will be destroying evidence." Lark nodded, her jaw set. She'd spent months depending on her mother's protection, hoping Sheena would see through Troy's manipulation. But watching her mother crumble under his threats, Lark realized a harsh truth. She couldn't wait for someone else to save her anymore. "I have to do this myself," she said quietly. Charles stepped forward, his calm presence steadying. "Not by yourself. You have us. But you're right. You need to be the one to take action." Through the window, they could see Sheena retreating from Troy's intimidation, making excuses, trying to smooth things over. The sight broke Lark's heart, but it also strengthened her resolve. Her mother was trapped by fear and dependency, but Lark refused to be controlled any longer. "We'll take the evidence to state police," Charles said, "beyond Troy's local influence, but you'll need to be ready to tell your story." Lark watched as Troy stormed into the house, brushing past Sheena. Her mother followed, making placating gestures, trying to maintain peace at any cost. The familiar pattern of manipulation and submission played out before them. But this time, Lark saw it with clear eyes. "I'm ready," she said firmly. "I've been silent long enough." Rhea quickly gathered their documented evidence into a secure folder. "We'll need to move fast," she warned. "Troy's suspicious now. He won't wait long before checking the barn." Lark looked at Huck, who stood alert beside her chair. The old dog had shown her the way to the truth, given her the courage to face it. Now it was her turn to be brave. "Let's go," she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "It's time to tell my story." The morning sun cast long shadows across the driveway as Charles adjusted the old rescue harness on Huck. The leather was worn, but still sturdy. The reflective canine search and rescue patches faded but readable. Huck stood straighter wearing it, as if remembering his years of service. "Perfect timing," Charles murmured, watching Troy's truck approach. "Remember, Lark, let me do the talking at first." Lark nodded from her wheelchair, her heart pounding. They had called the sheriff's office an hour ago, reporting suspicious evidence about her accident. Now everything hinged on Troy's reaction. Troy slammed his truck door, scowling at the small gathering. "What's this about?" "Just following up on some concerns about Lark's accident," Charles said easily. "Sheriff Mason asked me to take a preliminary look, given my search and rescue background." Troy's face darkened. "There's nothing to look at. It was investigated months ago." "Standard procedure to review cold cases," Charles continued. "Mind if we check your truck? Just to rule things out." "This is ridiculous," Troy snapped, but the arriving sheriff's car made him hesitate. "Fine, make it quick." Sheriff Mason stepped out, nodding to Charles. "Mr. Calder, you said you had something to show me?" "Yes, sir. Huck here is a certified rescue dog. We're going to let him do a quick inspection." Charles led Huck around the truck, the old dog's nose working steadily. At the tailgate, Huck's behavior changed. His tail went rigid, and he began pawing at the truck bed, whining urgently. "What's he alerting to?" Sheriff Mason asked. "Let's find out." Charles reached into the truck bed, feeling along the edge where Huck indicated. His hand emerged holding a length of frayed rope, its blue fibers distinctive. Lark gasped. She recognized those fibers. They matched the ones ground into her wheelchair's armrest the night of her accident. "That's not mine," Troy said quickly. "Someone must have planted it." "Interesting," Charles said, "because these specific fibers match evidence photos from Lark's accident scene, the ones that were never explained." Troy's face went from red to pale. "You can't prove anything." "The paint chips on Lark's locket match your truck's original color," Charles continued. "The rope fibers match, and we have photos of your hidden vehicle repairs." "You broke into my barn." Troy lunged forward, but Sheriff Mason stepped between them. "Mr. Gantry, I'm going to need you to calm down and come with me," the sheriff said firmly. "We have some questions about the night of Miss Whitcomb's accident." As the sheriff led Troy to the patrol car, Sheena emerged from the house. She watched silently as handcuffs clicked around Troy's wrists, her face a mix of relief and fear. "This isn't over," Troy called over his shoulder. "You can't prove anything." But his bravado cracked when Huck gave a low growl, standing protective beside Lark's wheelchair. For the first time, real fear showed in Troy's eyes. The patrol car pulled away, leaving them in stunned silence. Lark reached down to pat Huck's head, her hands trembling slightly. "Good boy," she whispered. "You did it. You found the truth." Charles knelt beside them, his expression serious. "You both did. Your courage made this possible, Lark." Sheena approached hesitantly. "I should have seen it sooner. Should have protected you better." "Mom." Lark reached for her mother's hand. "We can't change the past, but we're free of him now." They watched the patrol car disappear around the corner, carrying Troy away to face questioning. The morning felt brighter somehow, as if a dark cloud had finally lifted. For one shining moment, it seemed their ordeal was truly over. Justice had prevailed, thanks to an old rescue dog's determination and a young woman's refusal to stay silent. Lark felt lighter than she had in months, ready to begin healing at last. Huck sat proudly in his rescue harness, his mission apparently complete. He had protected his charge, exposed the truth, and brought a measure of peace to the family he loved. Charles scratched behind his ears, pride evident in his gentle touch. "What happens now?" Lark asked, looking up at Charles. "Now we make sure all the evidence is properly processed," he replied. "The sheriff will need formal statements from everyone." Sheena squared her shoulders, finding new strength. "We'll tell them everything. No more hiding." The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the farmyard when Troy's truck came roaring back down the gravel drive. Lark wheeled herself into the barn's shadowy interior, phone ready to document any evidence he might try to destroy. Her hands trembled as she pressed record, catching Troy's silhouette in the doorway. He hadn't seen her yet. Gasoline sloshed in a red container as he moved with desperate purpose. "Think you're so smart," he muttered, splashing fuel across the wooden floors. "Won't find anything when I'm done." Lark's heart hammered against her ribs. She tucked herself behind an old tractor, keeping the camera steady as Troy continued his frenzied work. The sharp smell of gasoline made her eyes water. The scratch of a match. A whoosh of ignition. Flames leaped hungrily across the fuel trail, racing up the walls faster than Lark could have imagined. Troy's boots crunched on gravel as he fled, leaving her trapped in rapidly thickening smoke. "Help!" she screamed, but the roar of the fire drowned her voice. Heat pressed against her face as she tried to wheel backward, but her chair caught on debris. Smoke filled her lungs, making her cough violently. A familiar bark cut through the chaos. "Huck!" The old dog burst through the smoke like a gray ghost, his rescue training taking over. He grabbed her hoodie in his powerful jaws, pulling with all his remaining strength. "Good boy," Lark choked out, helping him by pushing her wheels. The chair tipped sideways as a burning beam crashed nearby, sending sparks showering around them. Without thinking, Lark kicked free of the twisted chair, her legs moving on pure instinct. The sensation shocked her almost as much as the fire. She could feel her muscles responding, weak but alive. Huck pulled steadily at her clothing as she crawled forward on trembling limbs, each movement sending jolts of pain and possibility through her body. Another crash shook the barn. Flames licked at their heels as Huck guided her the final few feet to the door. They tumbled together onto cool grass, just as the barn's roof collapsed in a thunderous roar of timber and fire. Lark lay gasping in the grass, covered in soot, but alive. Beside her, Huck wheezed heavily, his muzzle singed and eyes watering. She wrapped her arms around his neck, feeling his racing heartbeat match her own. "You saved me," she whispered. "Again!" Sirens wailed in the distance as Sheena's scream cut through the air. "Lark! Oh God, Lark!" Footsteps pounded across the yard. Charles reached them first, quickly checking them both for serious injuries. "Don't move," he ordered, though Lark could already feel tingling awareness spreading through her previously numb legs. "I can feel them," she said wonderingly, wiggling her toes in the grass. "Charles, I can feel my legs." Huck pressed close against her side, his duty fulfilled one final time. Though exhausted and hurting, his tail thumped weakly against the ground as emergency vehicles flooded the yard with flashing lights. The courtroom fell silent as Judge Harrison delivered the verdict. Troy Gantry stood rigid, his face ashen as the evidence mounted against him. Charles's steady footage of the barn's hidden truck played on the screen, followed by close-ups of the matching paint chips and rope fibers. The prosecution presented Lark's phone video of Troy starting the fire, his own words condemning him. On the charges of hit and run causing grievous bodily harm and first-degree arson, the judge intoned, this court finds the defendant guilty. Lark squeezed her mother's hand as Troy was led away in handcuffs. Sheena wiped tears from her eyes, whispering, "I'm so sorry I didn't see it sooner, honey." The insurance settlement came through within weeks. Lark started intensive physical therapy at the Mountain Rehabilitation Center, where every small victory felt enormous. Her first wobbling step between the parallel bars brought tears to everyone's eyes. Huck watched from his cushioned bed in the corner, his tail thumping proudly against the floor. As summer faded into autumn, they took Huck to his favorite mountain lake. The old dog's muzzle had grown whiter, his steps slower, but his eyes still brightened at the sight of the water. Charles spread a blanket on the shore where Lark could sit comfortably, her legs stretched out before her. "He used to search these waters," Charles said softly, watching Huck wade in the shallows. "Never gave up until he found who he was looking for." Lark nodded, patting the blanket beside her. Huck limped over and settled his head in her lap, sighing contentedly as she stroked his ears. The afternoon light turned golden across the lake's surface. "Thank you," she whispered to him, feeling the steady slowing of his breath. "For everything you taught me about being brave." Huck's eyes drifted closed for the last time as the sun set behind the mountains. They buried him there, beneath a young pine tree overlooking the water. A month later, Lark stood between Sheena and Charles at the lake's edge, her legs trembling but holding steady. She took a step forward on her own, then another, growing stronger with each movement. "He showed me how to keep going," she said, watching the sunlight dance across the water. "Even when it seems impossible." Sheena wrapped an arm around her daughter's shoulders. "He'd be so proud of you, honey." "I know," Lark smiled, standing tall on her own 2 feet. "And I'm going to keep making him proud." Thank you for watching. Stories like this remind us who we are. If something touched your heart, go ahead and subscribe. I'll be back tomorrow with another story that just might stay with you.